any public input from the audience? We have quite a few people from the audience. Salsa Lisa.
I think they're all on the agenda though.
Okay. Was there anybody online? Or no?
There are a couple people online, Karna and Richard. You can raise your hand if you want to give any public comment. Katie, did I see you raise your hand? No, okay. So I'm not seeing any public comment.
Okay, perfect. So May 15 meeting minutes, was there any edits or changes to those? Or approval of them?
I'll make a motion to approve the meeting minutes as distributed.
I'll second.
Second.
Okay. Those are approved. And then our first topic is Visit Bend business plan. So we discussed this, had a presentation and discussed it last meeting. And so this is just the wrap up of that. And then we are voting and providing a recommendation to council.
Yep, so this will go to council on Wednesday. Kevin and I will be there to present. You all had a chance to digest it and after the last meeting. Kevin's got just a brief presentation today, focused more on the financial side of things. And then develop a recommendation or any feedback for council, and I'll turn that into a letter pretty quickly for Brianna to sign.
Awesome.
There's Kevin.
Okay,
There
I was
he is.
like.
All right, so I promise not to take as much time as I took last go around. Just wanted to make sure everybody saw that thing in full. Here is the quick deck I wanted to walk you through super fast. So what I tried to do is address some of the questions we had heard from people like Kevin and Travis and make sure that was built in. What we're looking at is really the deck we're going to present to council on Wednesday. So I'm going to go through this quickly and then open to any feedback or questions afterwards. So the first thing that I wanted to do was just, again, make sure council saw this. I know Ben's going to present it, but this is a really high level, the breakdown of transient room tax collections as they come in throughout a year. The gold bars being the contributions to the general fund, and the blue bars being what is the restricted portion of transient room tax, and the portion that Visit Bend is currently contracted to reinvest on the city's behalf. Kevin made a really good question regarding the last plan that we didn't sort of flesh out, which was we had made some assumptions about what this last fiscal year was going to do, but we didn't really articulate what actually happened. So we built this graph to show you the light blue bar being what the actual collections were from FY22, the prior fiscal year, versus what we had budgeted, which going into the year, we had projected an 8% increase. You can see that in the first few months of the year, that gold bar, which is the actuals, sort of hung in there. It trended in the direction we thought it was going to trend, and it was on pace with what we had been seeing happening. And then come November, you can see the sort of we stopped performing the level we thought we were going to perform and start to see pretty significant decreases, not just against what was projected, that 8% growth, but against actuals. So I think the reason I want to bring this up and to answer Kevin's question was the industry really, stopped doing well, sort of middle of the, not middle of the year, end of the calendar year, middle of our fiscal year, and has continued to trend this way. You'll see in the budget slides that we are projecting a flat year over year for what we saw. So what this gold bar is, we projected that same volume of business or tax collections for the next fiscal year. But this is really the justification for why we reduced how much we're putting into the grant programs and have put 15% into the Bend Sustainability Fund as proposed in the next budget, and 7.5% in the Bend Cultural Tourism Fund in the next budget. But just wanted to make sure you guys saw what we were looking at in terms of total collections. In terms of budget, the other thing that we heard was, we had put this high level number of projected city funding and the revenue numbers. You can see this year, the 5,111,974. That's the agreed amount with the budget committee of the restricted portion. So that's what the motion would be for on Wednesday. You see some of those other revenue numbers, and then you can see the breakdown of the expenses below that. We went a step deeper and wanted to present sort of how that rolls up into various categories. You can see the sales and marketing expenses broken down by different categories. As we've talked about over the years, digital marketing will continue to be the biggest category of marketing that we do in this next fiscal year. It just allows us to be very pliable and adaptable with our spend. And then you can see how the rest of those expenses play out against the revenue. Right now, you know, that $116 surplus number, this is going to fluctuate. There's no way we're going to come in right on the $5 million revenue number. So we'll fluctuate and react throughout the year as we normally do. And then the other part we just wanted to sort of bring to council's attention and remind this group is one of the things we realized is that coming out of the pandemic, we had moved to sort of that planning, preparation, experience phase of marketing, really talking to people once they got here. And because of COVID and the pandemic, sort of took our foot off the gas in terms of being top of mind in the awareness phase of marketing. So making sure Bend as a community is a preferred destination throughout the Pacific Northwest. You can see that in this next fiscal year, the marketing team really plans on focusing on that awareness phase of our marketing efforts so that people in the Pacific Northwest think of Bend as a desirable destination. And that gets me to this, where we really are consolidating our markets that we're going to be in, really getting back to Seattle and Portland as a bread and butter. We know that from a visitation perspective, this drives a significant majority of our visitors. And we just need to get back in that market and take care of our backyard in terms of where our visitors come from. We just were not moving the needle in the Bay Area like we thought we may be able to. So we're really taking a step back there and then really honing in on those markets and increasing our demographic targets. And then I took the liberty because I was, you know, maybe reading between the lines too much, but I sort of felt like I lost a group in this Venn diagram where we talked about what sustainability really means to us. And so we refined that to this seeking balance slide. And the point here is to really get across that when we think about the work we do, there's sort of 3 different categories under any sustainability model. And for us, these are the areas we focus on. So under economy, we want to make sure tax revenue is being generated for the city's general fund. We care that consumer spending continues to go up so our local businesses do well. And we also care that our local employees are getting wages, and those wages are going up, and we're increasing those numbers over a year. And the reason that matters is if we're not growing those budgets, then when you jump all the way over to place, things like the Bend Sustainability Fund are not as robustly funded as we may like. And so we feel all these things need to operate together. I think we can talk about workforce as well, where coming out of the pandemic, we weren't doing a great job supporting our hospitality and leisure workforce. And we saw the impacts of that both on tax revenues generated as well as wages earned. And businesses were struggling to operate. We also have come a long ways in wanting to better understand resident sentiment and how the industry impacts our local community, while also making sure guest satisfaction is an all-time high. Currently, Bend is the #1 destination in the state of Oregon from a tourism perspective, from a sentiment perspective, and it's #4, I believe, in the country, in the US. And we want to make sure that we're maintaining those numbers when we're looking at how the guest experience is playing out. So we just tried to refine and make sure people could visualize and understand why we felt the value in making sure the place remains healthy is as important as making sure the economic indicators remain healthy. And then also that the people that work and operate and surround the industry, we're also thinking about their perceptions and their sentiments and their well-being. And then the last thing we're going to talk about and not talk about, just show, are the 3 goals under each of these categories. And obviously, as you saw in the plan, there's additional action items associated with each one of these goals. These goals and action items are also aligned with city council goals and action items throughout the plan. But just at a very high level, make sure council understands some of the high level aspirational goals or ideas we're going to track over the course of the year. And then, of course, at the end of that next fiscal year, we'll go through the same process where we review and evaluate whether we achieved what we wanted to achieve, and whether we need to tweak our strategy at that time, more robustly fund grant programs again, start to refund things like the rainy day fund, but that will come after we get well into the next fiscal year. So that was the extremely abbreviated version, hopefully addressing some of the questions I heard 2 weeks ago. I can either stop sharing or you guys can let me know if you'd like me to go back to a certain slide and answer any questions.
I have a question. I don't know if you need to go back to the slide, but I noticed Boise had no, I saw the refocusing on the Seattle and Portland. And do we do no advertising in Boise?
We do not. We've done some A/B testing in our marketing in Boise, Spokane, Reno, and some other metros in those areas. And there's just so much competition. When you think about Boise, you think about Sun Valley, you think about McCall, Idaho, you think about Teton Valley, Idaho. It has just been really hard to move the needle. We see it some through group events when youth sporting events or other purpose-driven travel happens in our community. You will see people coming from those communities. But from a leisure perspective, it is really hard to get somebody to leave Idaho and come to Bend. Similar to Reno. I would also say this is the same argument we're leaving San Francisco. There's enough opportunity in Tahoe and other areas of California that we are getting visitation from there, but it's not increasing like we can with the new population moving into Portland, Seattle. So it's just based on past experiences of trying in those markets and having very little success.
Thanks.
Sorry, I was trying to fix the camera. It's fine.
Questions?
Nice job.
Yeah, I definitely think this was a lot more helpful to understand sort of where you're going and what you need to do in order to move forward. So, I mean, not that I didn't appreciate the last presentation with all the details, but for what we're talking about, I feel like this was super helpful. I guess I can make a motion to recommend approval to city council. Or if there's other comments that you want to add into that. A second.
And if there are any key points you'd like to make in the letter, that would be good to know. But if not, we'll just let council know that you all reviewed and recommend approval.
Yeah, ready to vote?
Yes. So you want to go for
We just said
it?
all in favor.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So then motion passed. What did I say?
Yeah, I don't think there's anyone opposed. Yeah.
Stephanie, great job. Yeah, very good job.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
The next topic is climate-friendly areas overview by Jennifer and is it Elise?
Yeah, and I guess I can tee this up just by saying there are a lot of things embedded in the climate-friendly and equitable cities rules that we've talked about. Climate-friendly areas are one of them. I will admit I don't even know a whole lot about them, so this is going to be an interesting presentation for all of us. And well, I'll let everyone introduce themselves because this is a bigger group. But I think this is the long-range planning team, and they're doing kind of the roadshow with all the standing committees right now to kind of fill everyone in. Roadshow.
So this is just a general presentation on what the climate friendly is kind of all about.
And this is just
There's
for
just
information.
Yeah, for information. Yeah, so my name's Brian Rankin, manage the growth management division. Let's introduce other folks on our staff and on down here. So some new faces, new members of our staff, and of course, new members here. So, Damien?
All right, good afternoon. I'm Damien Cernick. I'm a senior planner with the Growth Management Division. And for anybody watching at home, I'm wearing a white shirt and I have glasses.
I'm Jennifer Knapp, and I'm also a senior planner with Growth Management. And I'm wearing a flowered shirt today.
I'm Elise Vuklich. I'm an associate planner in growth management. I'm wearing a black dress.
And I'm wearing a blue shirt on the far left side. And so that is interesting, some chuckles there. We were presenting at Kovac, and part of the presentation there is to describe how you look. So on screen, people can recognize you in a different way. So folks, it's another way of cueing in so they can see who is talking.
Thank you for the extra
Sure,
explanation.
absolutely.
versus-
So to your point, yeah, this is an introduction and kind of just a first touch point on climate-friendly area study. So we're going to talk about climate-friendly area study. Most of the presentation is on that subject, and then Damian Cernick here is to provide an update on the Stevens Road Track, UGB expansion, and planning amendments that are coming up. So it's a little bit of a couple different subjects. We don't present before you often, so we're trying to get you the information that's pertaining to mostly to our department or our division right now. So the overall, no real decision to be made here today. I think we want to hear your questions. We want to provide answers. We're also curious about your kind of level of curiosity and involvement as we're doing what's called the climate-friendly area study. So it's just a study. This is going to be a process that runs between now and the end of the year. It's essentially studying potentials for climate-friendly area designation. There's a lot to it. We'll explain that. And that has to be wrapped up, and the study has to be submitted to Department of Land Conservation Development by the end of this year. And it's also just good to keep in mind too that these rules are, they're new, and they are changing as we speak. So I'm on an advisory committee in the states looking at making changes to those rules. They just changed. When was the last time those temporary rules were like a couple months ago, right? April. So we had the rules come out. It's a whole bunch of rules. And then there were changes to those rules. There are new changes under consideration, and they will be amended again. So it's kind of a work in progress. So we're trying to adapt to the work and to these rules. And most of this is driven by state rules. So with that, there's also a court of appeals case that's moving through the system. So I think we're going to hopefully get a decision sometime before the end of this year. It's kind of hard to tell on the timing of Court of Appeals, but apparently they are going to move that case forward as fast as they can. There are a number of cities that are challenging the rules, and so we have no idea what the fate of these rules will ultimately be after the Court of Appeals is done with it. So a lot of change. So with that, I'm going to kick it off to, I believe, Elise, and we'll go back and forth.
One quick question, if I could, just as an overview. I'm sure some cities are varying in their approach right now with how to respond to the climate-friendly cities initiative. So some cities are gung-ho 100%, spending their own money trying to do the research and comply with the rules as it sits today. Some are doing nothing. Where do we sit in that spectrum?
Well, our perspective, and also I think council direction, is we have rules, we have deadlines, and it's our job to follow those rules and deadlines, and then I would say to absorb and change with the rules as they occur. So most of the funding for this is an internal study that we're doing here. So this is just staff doing this work. We're not hiring a whole bunch of consultants. We do have a little bit of consultant help on an engagement portion of this. The state provided a grant, so there's some grant funding to help on some of the equity-based engagement. But most of the work is just done here by internal staff.
Okay. So do you think, are we all the way at the proactive side, or are we kind of a couple of cities ahead of us there?
I think, so again, it's hard to compare. We've done some peer learning events because all these rules are all new. So the LCDC, come on board, let's share what other cities are doing. I will say our approach, I think, is unique. I think it's more, our approach to the CFA study is citywide, and it's more of an open question of, hey, let's really study all the opportunities and learn pros and cons and advantages and disadvantages to where a climate-friendly area could be, rather than what a lot of cities seem to be doing is CFA is just going to be our downtown and adjacent little area, just focus here, and we're going to be done and move on. So we're taking a little bit more comprehensive look at this to provide the community and council and decision-making options.
Okay. Good background. Thank you.
Yeah.
So a climate-friendly area, or a CFA, is an area where residents can live, work, and meet most of their daily needs without needing a vehicle. And as part of the CFAC rules, Bend has to designate and study a CFA. The rules and requirements for how these areas are defined comes from the CFAC rules, but Bend has several areas that already kind of meet the requirements of a CFA. If you think about downtown Bend or the Central West Side, these are areas that have both housing and commercial uses. They're really well connected to other parts of the city through transit and transportation infrastructure. So a climate-friendly area would theoretically look and operate in a similar way. A CFA is also in line with the city's plans and policies for areas like the Bend Central District, which allows a mix of uses. And additionally, the CFAC rules place a really strong focus on equity. So underserved communities are at the center of informing where these go.
And as Brian mentioned, we did receive a grant for the initial portion of this outreach. The focus of the outreach plan is to center the voices of historically underserved community members and to provide meaningful opportunities for equitable involvement. The engagement is taking place now during the study, but also will proceed through the designation and the adoption. So far, we've completed one-on-one interviews with community leaders representing historically underserved groups and vulnerable populations. We partnered with the COCC Latinx college prep students on their winter curriculum, and they came here to City Hall to present their projects to staff, the mayor, and the city manager. And then just last month, we completed an equity focus group, and I'll talk more in next steps about what more we're planning. During the outreach, we have heard some key themes that have come to the top that I thought I'd share with you. One is that housing affordability is critical to ensuring that climate-friendly areas are equitable. Transportation options and accessibility should be prioritized. Groceries, medical services, and daycare facilities for lower-income households would best serve these communities. And designating these areas would provide an opportunity to connect with one another and potentially create more inclusive options, including higher density affordable housing alongside market rate.
So, next couple slides are illustrative. So I want to just explain some of the relationships here between the rules and some of the policy choices that ultimately I believe that the community will weigh in on, and ultimately the city council will have to make. The couple things. One is on sizing. So the rules that guide climate-friendly areas and designations and studies, they give us a standard. They say you have to size this to be large enough to accommodate 30% of your current, that's existing residents, and future residents in a climate-friendly area. So it's 30% of today and then 30% of the new coming forward. And that's about 15,000, a little over 15,000 housing units. The way we look at that is we can calculate the housing units inside the current city, and then we look at what's expected based on our last housing capacity and needs analysis up to the year 2028. We go, okay, that number is 15,000 or so. So total number of dwelling units, and we'll have to eventually prove this out. But what we wanted to do at this stage is go like, let's get a feel for how large this area has to be, and that gives us an idea then of where it could be, right? And how you could actually designate a CFA. So we know it's around 15,000 housing units, and based on the rules also go into great detail about, well, if you know an average dwelling unit is this size, a certain number of stories equals a certain number of housing units, you're at this height, so luckily we have Jennifer Knapp, who has a design and architecture background to help us navigate those. And so she's done some work getting really detailed on the ground and looking at a couple different areas. So this 275 to 350 acres is kind of a conceptual, but I think it gives us a good idea of, first of all, the size, the magnitude of what we're working with. It's based on looking at Bend Central District, Core Pine area, and Central West Side Opportunity area. So based on that, we think it's about that. It's about the size. And then the sizing is dependent on a couple policy choices. There are two graphics shown here. Option one. So the state rules say, look, you have a couple different ways you can do this. You can adopt their standards for building height for a CFA, or you can use other standards, right? And so the standards that the state says is like, look, maximum height would be 85 foot. You could get a 10-foot bonus for affordable housing. If that's the case, you need less acreage, right? Taller buildings, you need less acreage. If we go with more or less what we have in terms of heights in Bend, if we look at what we already allow in some of these opportunity areas like Bend Central District, then we're at a lower height, 65-foot maximum height with a 10-foot height bonus. That means you need slightly more area. So the basic math here is like there has to be a call at some point on how high are these buildings going to be within CFAs. If they're taller, you need less space. If we're going with more or less what we have, then you need a little bit more acreage. We also, there was another thing I forgot to mention. We have another grant that's looking at essentially pro forma based recommendations on, well, how would an 85 to 95 foot tall building work in Bend? Would it work? Is it likely to work? Is it likely to trigger redevelopment? This is another grant from DLCD called the market study. And what we've learned thus far, it isn't done yet. So we're still in the grant period, writing it up, but we've been briefed. And what we're hearing is that by and large, going up to 85 to 95 foot is probably not going to work for most developers because the construction type changes. You're going to have to add more and more levels of concrete, more steel. That higher cost does not pencil out with the rents that are available today. So I think it was kind of a surprise. We were curious. And also this kind of finding is based on a lot of interviews with developers of these projects. So it's a little bit of financial analysis, discussions with developers, and just doing some prototypical pro formas on these buildings. It looks like they're just not that desirable in today's market conditions. So those taller buildings, a little bit less desirable today. Not to say it couldn't change in time. And so what we're hearing is generally the height standards that we have seem to be working to fit the market needs and the financials of the development community.
Just a comment on that, because I think, yeah, maybe under current building codes, that's the case, but if building codes can be changed or new ones adopted, there are certainly alternative construction methods that might allow light gauge steel construction with a single podium to reach more of a what we consider to be a type 1 high-rise building that bring the cost down. There's also volumetric modular construction, but that requires code changes, given all the fire considerations. But I think it's worth continuing to study that and not writing off high-rise right away, and just looking a little deeper into alternative construction approaches that could bring that cost of construction down in line with the rents that the local market could sustain.
Yeah, and point well taken. We're not closing the door on the heights. I just want to be clear. So it's still a policy option. It's going to be a policy option as we move forward. Okay. And this was just the first study as well. So you're right, things can change. And I'm also a little hesitant because what we're, and obviously you'll know this better than I know it, but financial conditions change, right? Within, let's say, a 10, 20-year time horizon. So locking in a policy decision now that we say we're going to build just to this height could prevent that opportunity from being available in the future if conditions change. Interest rates go down, construction costs go down, rents go up, building codes change. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so just the time period that we're talking about, is it 10 to 20 years with the 15,000 units? Is that, you have to have that by when?
So
or is that a thing?
No, it's interesting. It's essentially, let's see, it's a sizing that's based on essentially an estimate of what you have on the ground in terms of units and then what you forecast you need. So, for example, the city is planning on updating our housing capacity analysis, doing a new projection forward, right, in this next year. So when we do that, this number would change. Could go up, probably go up, I imagine.
Okay. So it's going to be variable.
Yeah, it's variable.
Gotcha.
And then it's also, I would call it theoretical. So this is a theoretical capacity, right? It doesn't mean that we have, well, the city, as you know, we don't control who builds where. We simply entitle land, make infrastructure available, change development codes, create incentives, right? We're sizing it to accommodate theoretically that many housing units. Does not mean that those housing units are going to show up there in 5 or 10 or 15 years. And if you were to ask me, just, it's going to take a long time, a long time.
And you're not going to necessarily say, oh, this 40 unit complex is going to be denied because I need a 200 unit complex or vice versa.
Yeah, correct.
How does that, just for context, how does that compare to how many units are available now, the 15,000?
Most of this, this number is mostly existing housing units, right? So this is where it's really kind of strange conceptually. Think about it. 30% of existing residents, that's a lot. That's, 30,000 people, right? 30% of 100 roughly, right? Or excuse me, less than that. We know that is part of the sizing here. And then the future need, I think, what do we need? 15,000 housing units. So 30% of the 15. So most of this is made up. Most of these units and that size is made up by existing residents that we have to size for. It doesn't mean people are going to move. It doesn't mean we're depopulating areas of Bend. But what it means is that you have to make a CFA big enough to accommodate quite a bit of growth over the long haul. Ben, do you have any questions? Can I be more clear? You sure?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Do I have a confused
All right.
look on my face?
Well, I know Ben pretty well, so I know his puzzled face. It's a puzzled face.
No,
Feel
no,
free to ask
that was
back
my
to
engaged
ask
face.
I have a question.
Oh,
Sure.
Just relative to why this came up or how this came up at the state level. Like ultimately, it's a state rule that's going to say that you have to follow our CFA, and so the UGB and all the other things that affect the ability to grow. What's the alternative? Like, is there an alternative? I guess once you determine, let's just say you determine that this is not feasible because of the parameters set forth. Like what happens? Maybe nobody knows, but
Maybe that's why there's state appeals.
yeah.
Well, I think that, so just to kind of like get to the chase, right?
Yeah.
The CFAs, they're saying, look, CFA, you have to zone and allow certain kind of uses, right? Certain heights, certain mix of uses in order to accommodate conceptually, say this 15,000 housing units. Back of the envelope, back of the envelope math, it looks to us like we can get there with existing zoned areas. We don't have to create new areas necessarily, but it is a policy choice to create new areas, right? So for example, with Bend Central District, the Central West Side, Core Pine, just take those 3 opportunity areas. If you just do a line around them and said, these are our climate friendly areas, we have the heights, we have the capacity. From a theoretical capacity standpoint, those areas would probably suffice to be a climate friendly area. So what does that mean on the ground? It means in terms of the designation, you're just simply drawing a line around a map and calling that a climate friendly area. I'm using that just for illustrative purposes, right? So in terms of this being something big and onerous, I think it will be not necessarily in the designation, but downstream, what it means to be in a CFA, which I'm going to cover. But I think we're going to be able to designate these areas. I think we're going to be able to meet the state's rules. I think it's otherwise consistent with the policies that we already have in place in terms of growth management. And so I don't think it's a real big deal. There are a lot of details that are difficult to follow. It's not easy work and it's confusing, but it can be done. And let me talk about the downstream implications.
Yeah.
I'll hit some content here. So sizing and location examples. So we have, I just mentioned one combination. Well, you could draw a climate friendly designation around a couple opportunity areas in the core of the city. That could be one policy choice, but there are other policy choices. You can essentially size these in a variety of forms, right? You have to have a minimum amount of acreage. Let's just call it 300 because it's right in between our 2 bookends. Okay, well, I want 300 acres. We could make one big climate friendly area in the center of the city or somewhere else. We could have smaller, or I would say medium-sized climate friendly areas. And then you could have more smaller kind of nodal type development. And each one of these areas would then be expected to provide that capacity. So we're not locked in terms of where the climate friendly area is. There are clearly some areas that will be more appropriate than others, right? So I just want to be clear, there's not just one option here. And then why does it matter? So to your point again, and your question is that there are implications involved in being an area being designated as a climate-friendly area. First of all, where your climate-friendly area is located, whenever we update our transportation plans, we have to assume quite a bit of development goes there. So that's when we're going to have to essentially make some assumptions about the future development of this area over time. So that could affect how we plan for transportation. It could affect how we allocate growth. So the rules say that you're going to have to assume there's language in the rules, and I'm asking questions about this language to the folks who wrote the rules. You're going to fill up these CFAs first, allocate the growth here first before you do to other parts of the city. I'm like, well, how's that going to work?
Right. You do that.
And then you have to do other things. So once you designate a climate-friendly area, you have to do infrastructure kind of analysis, look at your multimodal system and identify gaps, have a plan to fill those gaps. So think sidewalks, bike lanes, you have gaps in transit, you have gaps in your low-stress network. So you have to have basically a plan that says, here are the gaps, here's how to fill those gaps. Highway impact study. So how's this going to impact highways? And then importantly, the rules as they're structured now require cities to do ongoing monitoring. So every year, every 2 years, we're doing reports to the state. Say, okay, here's how many affordable housing units are in your CFA. Here's how many housing units are totally in your CFA. Here's how much of your transportation budget was spent. What % of your transportation budget was spent in a CFA on multimodal improvements? So there's a lot that's involved in climate-friendly areas, but they come after the designation. Does that give a better answer to your question?
So then, seems to me, the small one could not be problematic, because if you designate a bunch of small ones and somebody comes in and does a subdivision and you're getting 7 to 10 units per acre, then all of a sudden you've lost your capacity to get what you need. And then do you have to find new areas? I could see how Core Pine and the BCD and all that makes sense, because nobody's going to put a subdivision in those areas. They're going to go max height most likely. So doing the dispersed seems like it could be problematic in terms of having to change things.
So that's a good point. And again, I don't want to get too specific with the map. I think I know what you're saying. You're looking down at the southeast and down there. Wait a second, what's going to happen down there? That's already platted, and you're correct. What this means is that if you can imagine in the future, the city has a responsibility to create a climate-friendly area, basically a zoning district, right? Here's your CFA. So you can do a central one, and you can do different locations of that designation, and it has development codes with it that will have higher heights. So it really, I think, is targeted to either places mostly that are going to be redevelopment opportunities rather than greenfields. Because there's another requirement and downstream effect is that these CFAs and the transportation analysis, we also have to demonstrate how we're reducing reliance on the vehicle miles traveled, right? So we're going to have to pay attention to where this is located, because our transportation models are going to assume a whole bunch of development, and we have to not increase our vehicle miles traveled. So it gives you an idea of some of the.
Is there some minimum size? Because if it's only 5 acres, or, I mean, it seems like.
What's the minimum size again? 25 acres? 25 acres minimum size. But as you can tell, because our needs are in the couple hundred acres, that so you could say, well, if we do more of these designations, you'd make them in the 25 to 40 acre, you can cluster one here, and still add up to your total acreage to prove to the state that we have the capacity that we need.
Seems from just an ongoing, well, from a budgetary standpoint, less is more, fewer. If you can concentrate a lot of those infrastructure improvements that need to be made in a single area versus multiple kind of multimodal areas.
I also wonder though, does that then, if you have to spend the money in one location in your entire city, cause other issues? Like then how do you get enough fund? Like if it says, okay, all of your money has to go to the CFA, what do you do about your surrounding modal and transportation conditions? Do you then take too much away from everything else?
Yeah.
I don't know what the right answer is, but just it seems like I
No,
could see it being
this is
gold
perfect.
both ways.
This is exactly the conversation right here, right? Well, what are the pros and cons of, say, a centralized investment strategy, but then you're not investing in other places? So it's kind of, I like, think of CFA as what the intention is policy-wise. We want these to be mixed use. We want them to be very safe for people to walk, bike, take transit. It's going to be not focused on the automobile, right? It's pedestrian focused, right? It's going to be mixed use and it's going to be dense. It can be 85 to 95 foot dense, or it could be not quite as dense, right? 65 to 75 foot. Where should those places go and why? And then what are the trade-offs from a policy standpoint? And so it's a very interesting conversation. That's why we're here before you, because we're writing these things down and writing your considerations down, that we can pull them into the study and kind of mention these things as we're going through this process. So.
Impacts on school districts are being considered too.
We are going to reach out to the school district and parks as well. Yeah, we haven't reached out to them yet. We're just kind of ramping into it here.
Yeah.
So. Oh, you want the mic?
Sorry.
Until 1.
Thank you. So clearly there's a lot of flexibility and options for where a CFA could go and how many could be designated. But for this year, for 2023, our goal is really to just study and analyze potential areas and make the policy decision in the following years. So on this map, we have identified some areas that already meet a lot of the requirements of what a CFA could be or have the potential to become a CFA over time. And as Brian kind of mentioned, not all of these areas will become a CFA, but depending on the policy choices, it could be one of these, it could be a combination of these to get the acreage that we need. And in identifying these areas, we were really looking at existing land use designations. So in particular, we wanted to focus on areas that already allow multi-unit residential and commercial. We tried to stay away from low density existing residential neighborhoods. And we also looked at where people work in Bend, which tends to correlate with commercial uses. And then in conjunction with this, we've worked on developing a mapping tool that's spatially analyzing the entire city. And we're looking specifically at connectivity. So the existing transportation system, as well as how the transportation system is expected to grow within the TSP, the Transportation System Plan. We're looking at population and employment density. And then we're also looking at equity. So we're analyzing which parts of Bend have populations of people that would be vulnerable to displacement in the event of a big zoning change. And this is our timeline for the project. As I mentioned, our current phase is to study potential CFAs. And at this point, all possibilities are in consideration. Our study is due to the state at the end of 2023. The next phase in 2024 is going to involve the actual selection of preferred CFAs, finalizing the analysis, and preparing any code amendments to the zoning code that we have to make. And then in 2025, City Council will make the final decision to designate one or more climate-friendly areas. And throughout this process, community engagement and outreach is a big part of what we're doing.
And so for next steps for the community engagement over the summer and the fall, we'll be having community pop-ups at farmers markets and other events throughout the city. We're going to be meeting and presenting to stakeholder groups. And we're also going to have an open house in the fall.
And in terms of the technical work, we are finalizing the anti-displacement analysis, finishing up the maps, and looking at capacity of the potential CFAs.
And I'm wondering, if you do me a favor, can you go back a couple slides to the timeline? Right there. So
You move the mic over for Brian. There we go.
sorry about that. You may wonder why, okay, you do a study and then you're kind of waiting and then you're designating a couple years out, right? So naturally, you might wonder why. The study is due, we have a state deadline, right? So you have to give us, they require the study by the end of the year. Okay, so we're shooting towards that deadline. What we learn in this study, conversations that we're having with committees, with community members, those conversations trying to pull all of those into the study, right? And then starting next year, we have some council goals that are really important goals related to an economic development strategy and an employment opportunities analysis, housing capacity analysis, and essentially kind of gearing up for preparing for accommodating our new 20-year employment and housing needs. That will naturally include looking at opportunities for change within the current urban growth boundary. And this is one of those changes, right? So this is one of the many things you can do inside the current urban growth boundary to affect change, to create some new policy outcomes and meet the state rules. And then that is also the precursor to then considering expanding the urban growth boundary and how that would work. So what we're trying to do is package the CFA designation with the rest of the work, right? Rather than just go and designate this thing quickly and get it done. We want to pull this into the consideration of how it works with the whole urban growth boundary. So the designation is one of many ways to accommodate future growth. But we want to make sure this fits in with all the other changes inside and also any kind of expansion. So I just wanted to provide that clarity because I understand that you would be interested or concerned about how this fits in with the urban growth boundary. So this is partially that thinking and that strategy is informing this timeline. So, any questions that you may have, and how would you like to get involved in the study itself too? We're thinking of potentially a work group, creating a work group, 1 or 2 members from the various committees. That's on the table. It seems like a number of committees are really excited about having some involvement. I know it may not be the mainstay of all of your work, but it seems to us that there may be enough folks that are interested in the various committees of the city to maybe come together into a work group that would advise staff. We can keep you up to date on what's happening, review materials as they become available. So I'm putting that on the table as well as a potential option if you want to continue to be involved, but in an informal way through the staff advisory group, and then we can report back in as well.
I mean, certainly makes sense just from the different components that would be within the CFA that you get a lot of input from the various committee. I mean, it seems very logical that you would want all of those different perspectives sitting at the table, considering that they would all be involved in the end. But yeah, I guess aside from like the political confusions of why some of these are being designated or to what level, I'll do my own side research, I guess. But I think most of my questions are around that. But as far as the approach and doing the study now and coming up with what makes the most sense, I think that's a good direction to spend an entire year researching that and seeing what maybe fits Bend the best.
I've got a couple of questions on the density math. So if we're talking about 300 acres and 15,000 units, something around 50 units per acre, could you put that in context with maybe the most dense part of Bend, maybe what the Pearl District is? Because some of that land you have to set aside for retail, for other uses, so it's a complete community. So it's not just housing. It seems pretty dense.
That's about the
Do you
UGB
want me to
expansion.
answer that?
Oh yeah, go ahead, take a shot.
So currently we're following the prescriptive method. And so I can answer to that. It's about 100 dwelling units an acre. And so that's much higher. I think the highest density right now is about 25 dwelling units per acre. Is that correct, Elise? And I would have to get back to you on the Pearl District.
And when you say the highest right now, that's in Bend, the highest is 25.
Well, the highest zoned density is 25 dwelling units an acre.
Highest zoned.
What's built?
That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah.
If
That's what's
I picked
allowed.
like what Pilot Butte to Safeway on the east side, there's a lot of multi-unit structures, and I'm just off the top of my head, I can't imagine that getting to 20 or 30 dwelling units per acre overall as a 20 acre or 40 acre area.
Yeah, I mean, the intent is that it is a high density urban area. So you should think of places like the Pearl District.
Yeah. That's why I just
Although
wondered what the
obviously
Pearl
that's
was.
a lot higher height.
Right.
I think so. If you look at the timber yards, for example, right, that's timber yards approval would meet, it's more or less like a climate friendly area designation, right? So I I think what you might be getting at is, so that's the density, the level of density, more or less, that is envisioned in a climate-friendly area designation. If the policy choice is made to increase heights to go up another 10, 20 feet, okay, you could expect that kind of building. In terms of the designation, I think what you might be getting at is, wow, if you designated 300 acres, right, to allow for it, you're probably not going to see all those housing units. Correct.
Not
Right.
bad.
Correct. Yeah. Right. And so that is, so we call it, it's almost like theoretical paper capacity, right? So technically speaking, from the standpoint of the rules, you have a theoretical capacity to put that many housing units in about 300 acres, right? Now, whether or not that's actually going to happen and how long it would take for that to happen is another thing.
I just foresee 10 years from now them saying, well, how'd you do? Well, we got 10% of that number. Boy, you're failing.
Right. Right.
So,
well, and that's part of it. I think what the state, we've had a number of meetings, interactions with state staff, and a lot of guidance from them as well, because they're figuring out the rules as they're implementing them, as we're trying to figure out what to do with the rules. Yeah, it's pretty fun. It's pretty dynamic. And they have a pretty clear intention that they want to make sure that there are some areas in cities that are zoned and have the infrastructure to support this kind of development pattern, which is necessary for state to hit its climate goals. So you have to remember, this is DLCD. They have climate goals in terms of reducing GHGs. I think it's 90% by 2050, 90% of 1990 levels by 2050. So it's an audacious goal. And in their modeling of the state, they have made assumptions about how cities develop. And part of their assumptions in part of the modeling is that cities become more dense and have this kind of development pattern in a place that allows people to essentially not use automobiles as much and to get out of their cars, to be walking around. It's designed to change mode. Basically, it's designed to change human behavior and provide this opportunity. I'm not saying good, bad, or ugly. These are the assumptions that the state has made in terms of how cities have to develop across Oregon, at least the MPO areas. Whether or not it will actually do that, and then how this also interacts with housing law is going to be something we're all going to have to wrestle with as a community. There may not be a great fit between the objectives of climate here and these rules and some of the objectives in terms of meeting continuing housing need and addressing the housing crisis through like urban growth boundary expansion, for example.
You thought the urban growth boundary rules were restrictive. Obviously, they weren't getting the outcome from the urban growth boundary rules that they wanted, and so now they've added more to consolidate.
It seems like a wheel spin exercise to a degree to even think it's possible for a city like this to achieve those kind of goals. I mean, private development does all of the things that they're asking to do because a private developer is going to want all the same things other than potentially the equity piece of that. So, private development is going to want walkability, private development is going to want mixed use, all those things. So if you just let this kind of ride for 10 years or 15 years down the road, private development will ultimately dictate where development happens. So if this is a financial component, I assume, from the state getting funding either to cities or from someplace else to achieve the goal. I mean, there has to be another component to it than what's been described. I don't understand, outside of private development, I don't understand what we're trying to achieve at the end.
Are there, on that note, if you're doing development within these CFAs, do you have to build to a certain level of sustainability, whether it's or do you have to include a certain percentage of the units be made available for workforce or affordable housing? I know there was an equity piece to this, but I think your comment where the private sector is going to focus where its investors are going to be aligned, and those generally will serve a lot of the community needs, but not all the community needs. And usually what gets left behind you have the equity piece related to affordable housing and workforce housing. And then you have kind of more of a philosophical question or moral question of like, should that be included or is that in lieu? And so, I mean, those are conversations at maybe the city council level, but I think all important considerations in this discussion of a CFA. But if I was curious if there added cost, development cost to anybody who's doing development within these CFAs, because then I wonder if there's not, it's almost like, what's the point?
Yeah.
To your comment, just let the system happen as it has been happening and will probably satisfy a lot of the need. So it seems like that there's some strings attached and maybe we're just not understanding what those strings are just yet.
Well, those are great comments. I think I don't have a perfect response to all of it because a lot of it's, what's the overall intention of the rule makers, not the rule followers, right? But I can share that, the city has sought funding and I think our comments to DLCD staff, as well as legislators, as well as our lobbyists, and our city council has been very clear that, look, if you want this to work, it's going to take funding, it's going to take money. And so state, if you're requiring this of cities, support those efforts, either in the planning or the infrastructure or the affordable housing, but bring those resources to bear, or else we may be put in a situation that you've mentioned, which is, okay, now what, right? Like this isn't
It doesn't
enough.
work without it.
Right.
I mean, there's, being in the private development world for a very long time, if there's no incentive for a developer to develop within that area, they're going to go where it makes sense for them to have a return on their investment. That's.
I do think just perspective wise, this is all very new, right? So these rules are brand new. No cities have really, we haven't gone through even the first cycle of, say, planning. And I think that clearly the rules, the structure of the rules, if you were to spend a ridiculous amount of time doing what we do and staring at these rules, you'd see, this is pretty clear. You create these climate friendly areas, and then you're going to be expected to invest in them. City is expected to invest in them. It doesn't say exactly a dollar amount. It doesn't say exactly what percentage, but you're going to have to keep your eyes on these climate friendly areas. Essentially, you should be planning on spending more and more of your capital dollars in terms of your bike, ped, transit networks in these areas, right? Because you're tracking it, sending reports to the state. It does not come with funding guaranteed. I anticipate, though, that cities, and many cities are very concerned about this for the same reasons we're concerned. And so we're saying, look, if we want to do this and do it right, we want to invest. So can we target state money for affordable housing in a CFA? There's a way to create a financial incentive. You can bring investment dollars for infrastructure to a CFA, for example. So I think your points are well taken. We're trying our best. So far with this legislative session, we're not having a fantastic amount of luck getting much, if anything, in terms of financial assistance for that level of investment in a future CFA.
What kind of penalties are there in the laws for not following or coming up short or?
Well, we have a joke about DLCD jail. So I could just share that, what happens? Do we go to DLCD jail? Is there a DLCD jail? They come down and take me over to Salem. I honestly haven't spent too much time looking at their penalties tend to be like, well, if we gave you a grant, give money back. They can hold up they can issue enforcement orders and essentially compel you to do this work, right? So if the city just says, no, we're not going to do it, we don't like it. And some cities are taking that political kind of stance. You can choose that, but DLCD is still going to be there with the same rules. And they'll probably issue enforcement orders. If you want to make a change to your comprehensive plan, say you want to expand to UGB, say you want to do something for housing, say you want to do an infrastructure plan, then they have you.
Your consequence is that you get nothing else.
Yeah, that's kind of figure.
I kind of look at it as that, like this is your teacher, right? And you have to submit your paper to the teacher. Don't make the teacher angry. Don't tick off the teacher. Be the good student. Do good work.
So from a city's perspective, have you added budget line items for this specific process and staff associated with this specific process?
Well, you're looking at 4 of the 5 planning staff that are responsible for this. That in the work plan that I shared with you before, we're considering this as one part of a larger work program, right? I have created cost estimates and sent these to the state to support funding requests and grants, et cetera. It's expensive work if you really want to do it well. And I would say that we're getting some grants from the state, but it's certainly not, it's not paying for staff time. It's just, here's an $80,000 grant to do some engagement. Here's, a $30,000 grant to do some market analysis. So it's by no means pays for all the costs that are taken on.
Does it apply to all cities, or is there a size, like a minimum size?
You know that?
So it doesn't apply to all cities in Oregon, just those that are in what are called metropolitan planning organizations. So there are 8 of them around Oregon that are tend to be the largest cities, where cities will work with the county and maybe other small cities and coordinate on transportation planning.
You said there's 8?
8 MPOs around Oregon's like Portland, Salem, Kaiser, Eugene, Springfield, Medford, Bend, Corvallis, Southern Oregon. I'm not sure if I've counted off 8, but those are the ones I think about.
That makes more sense. I was thinking about like anything called a city. I was like, this might be tough for some of them.
And this
but-
is unique to the state of Oregon?
Yes.
And the rules apply equally regardless of what size those metropolitan areas are? Or are they like graduated?
Well, it's based on the formula, right? The 30%, like, so whatever your need is. So I guess in some ways
Yeah,
it's
there are some
tiered.
There are some gradations in the rules depending on city size. So for example, if your grants pass, there are certain rules that apply to you that certain rules won't apply to you that will apply to, say, Medford or Bend because of our city size.
Yeah, we're in the 100,000 plus population category. So the rules get more and more stringent, essentially, for larger cities. And the rules reference if you're in an MPO and you're greater than 100,000, that's our set of rules.
Like
think
just
there-
over that.
There are variations of this program in other states that operate maybe slightly differently. California has its regional housing goals that cities have to meet. This to me just seems like the state recognizing that it wants to make its contribution to more climate friendly policies. And so whether Oregon's leading or following other states, I suspect we'll continue to see a lot more of these types of programs rolled out across the country. I don't think it goes away, but in the early days of adoption and trying to understand what this is and how it benefits us all, that I think it seems like that's where we are right now. There's, like you were saying, a lot of uncertainty, and it's a dynamic situation that probably requires a lot of patience.
Okay, well, we've gone a little bit over, and we've got a few more things on our topic, but go ahead.
We have 2 more slides.
Oh,
And I can make
it's like
it very
surprise, 2 more slides.
It's just, if you can fit it, if not, we can come back.
I think we're okay.
We can come back.
Yeah, we can probably
All right.
squeeze it in.
Then we just won't do any, we'll hold any questions until after, I guess.
Yep.
Or till next time. Send them to me.
Yeah,
Get 'em-
send them my way and I'll make sure we get your questions answered.
So we're going to switch from climate-friendly areas to a different project that we're working on, which is the Stevens Road Tract. This is a tract of land that is currently outside of Bend's urban growth boundary. It is east of the Trans-Canada National Pipeline that runs southwest to northeast in between Stevens and Ferguson. And the reason we're talking about this is back in 2021, in the 2021 legislature, the legislature passed a bill that was passed and then signed by the governor, House Bill 3318, that allowed the city of Bend to try a different process for including this property in its urban growth boundary, but also spending more time at the back end on looking at outcomes that we'd like to achieve through master planning, including affordable housing. So last year, one of the key pieces that the city completed was getting state approval of a concept plan for the Stevens Road tract. The tract itself is, I think, 261 acres in size. And so, we were looking at a concept plan for about 198 buildable acres for multi-housing, but it included land for open space, parks, and then some land for employment, for commercial areas and then mixed employment. Right now, when I say we, I should say I'm working on 2 concurrent processes right now to include the piece in the urban growth boundary. We have an application that we're going to be taking to the Planning Commission in July to bring the property in the UGB according to the terms of the bill. And I have a concurrent application with Deschutes County so they can modify their comprehensive plan and their maps to include this property in the UGB. Later this year, we have an additional step to complete under the bill, which are some amendments to our comprehensive plan. These are going to look very similar to what we've done with the 2016 UGB expansion, where for every area we had adopted a specific set of policies that really kind of outlined the expectations for land for housing, employment, transportation, coordination with school district, park district, and what we wanted to see out of development. Could you go to the next slide, please? So this may be a refresher, this may be new for some of you, but where we ended up with our concept planning was looking at alternative 3 that you see on the right side of the slide. The area to the left of it, which is a little bit lighter shading, is the Stevens Ranch Master Plan. That had already been approved by the time we started working on the concept plan. So we took into consideration a lot of the land that was already designated in this area for commercial development and industrial, with looking at planning for the Stevens Road tract. You'll see most of the land is identified for housing. There's about 12 acres of land for employment, based in part, again, because there's quite a bit of land in the Stevens Ranch Master Plan for industrial uses and for commercial development. The master plan itself, we're also looking at incorporating quite a bit of open space, a trail system, but also looking at more of an integrated transportation network so people have options for getting around and coordinating that work with transit. So that's really kind of informing our work as we look at the planning amendments that we'll be working on later this year. And that is my very brief presentation.
Thanks for the update on that. I have one thought forming that I don't want to go unsaid on the whole climate friendly area thing. Just thinking back on who we represent, we're, Bend Economic Development Advisory Board, and how much other work planning could have or does have on its plate. We live in a world of trade-offs. I would think this committee might consider suggesting that we dial down our response and maybe do less in response to climate friendly areas, just because we don't know all the rules and we have other things to do. I don't know if anybody else is thinking that.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, that's kind of where I was headed too. It just seems like, yeah, there's a lot on the city's plate currently to deal with. And, something like this it just seems far-fetched to be able to pull it off in a meaningful way. I mean, unless the state came forward and said, we're going to guarantee each city that meets these goals $10 million or whatever that looks like. But to do it for, again, no return, no guaranteed return, seems like, yeah, just a risky move on the city's part to invest that time and energy without a return.
It's the quote of, do you want to be on the bleeding edge or the cutting edge? Like,
I mean, my only caution on that is just if you look at the billions of dollars that are set aside under ESG programs from the investor standpoint, they're looking, depending on how this all shakes out from a rules and requirement standpoint, if these CFAs are going to create opportunities for investors to satisfy their ESG requirements by putting investment into communities that are doing something about the environment and social justice, then I think we would want to be shouting as loud as we could about these opportunities and creating as much awareness, as our friend Kevney likes to say, about what Bend is putting out in the marketplace to attract investment. So that would be my only caution. But yeah, it seems like without knowing all the rules and regulations just yet, seems like we might be spinning our wheels as a committee. And so maybe when there's a little bit more clarity and focus on where this is going and what the rules are, then we can maybe be more impactful and in your ongoing efforts.
I was trying to hold out, but because I know this team won't say it, but one of the things that we're cautious of in terms of when you said bleeding edge, that's when I sort of kind of come up. We are on the bleeding edge of this for a variety of reasons. The main thing is we're growing so fast. So we will probably be the first city in the state that is going to attempt to figure this out because of the needs around housing, the urban growth boundary and all that. So we have to dive into this world. We really don't have a choice because of all the other initiatives and goals that we have, plus we're growing so fast. So we just can't go do an urban growth boundary expansion without the consideration of what these rules mean. That's the difficult part of this, and we're trying to get funding and we're trying to do as much as we can at the state level. This team they're very modest and humble, but they are probably the most respected growth management team that you have in the state. They are very well respected. Our comments and our concerns are heard at the state level. I think this is the only team that has dove into the rules to the extent of what they haven't figured out as much as they could. But I just want to let this board know we really don't have a choice because we have to look at our employment needs and our housing needs and figure out what our next future is. So unfortunately, we will be on the bleeding edge of trying to figure this out.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Thanks for the presentation.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you for your time
thank
today.
Can I ask a question?
Don, you can just ask it on Wednesday when you're in the office if that works.
Can he be in the room?
Yeah. Yeah, we'll catch him.
The next up is the Child Care Grant Small Business Development Center. Catherine.
Yeah, and Catherine and I have been talking about this for a while. So we have $100,000 from the city's general fund that was allocated to childcare assistance. Really realized that the economic development program isn't the best administrator of those funds. We can't make a value judgment on who's doing well and who isn't. And that's where Catherine comes in. So we've been talking about this for a little while and wanted to run it by BDAB before June 21st. We're hoping to go to council.
Yeah. So this we are asking for a vote to recommend to council decision.
And then how do I share screen in Zoom?
There should be, well, I'm pointing at that one, but there's the green share screen button down at the bottom there, Catherine.
Maybe because I'm an attendee.
Oh, let me promote you right now.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought you were moved up. There you go. It should be
Instant
up.
promotion.
And this is a bit time sensitive too, in that Catherine actually has a childcare that would benefit from accessing these funds. So we're going to try to accelerate it through council. I've talked to the mayor about that. This would be a consent agenda item, but really wanted to make sure it came before BDAB first before we took it to council.
And I just like to ask, how many of you are familiar with the Early Childcare Business Accelerator Program? Okay, others individuals are not. So I kind of bolstered, I understand I'm on a time commitment, so I'm going to talk very quickly. I have a business card as well as a white paper that was put together for our program for you to have additional information. And Ben should have shared a document with you on the grant proposal, so you have access to that. I'm going to bolster my presentation with some background information just for those individuals that don't know what we're up to. So I am operating, my position was brought on in 2021 under a Child Care Resource Expansion Grant awarded to Neighbor Impact. There are 3 different opportunities, which I outlined in the grant proposal that are currently going on, A, B, and C. Opportunity B and C is what I'm here to talk to you about. The original funding for this program came from the City of Bend and Deschutes County and City of Sisters. And they came together after the childcare crisis and said, what can you do to give us some more childcare? Because we don't have a workforce if we don't have childcare. So Ken, the director of the SBDC, which is the Small Business Development Center, and Karen Crowell, the director of the Child Care Resource and Referral Network, which is Neighbor Impact Child Care Resources in Central Oregon, came together for a partnership to create a program that would teach individuals the best business practices aligned with the training and resources they need in early education. This partnership is kind of new and of its kind and is really special. And part of my job right now is actually rolling what we've done here in City of Bend out across the state. We've caught national attention with what we're doing and the success that we've had with this program, and other areas are interested because the Small Business Development Center and CCR&R are often housed within community colleges, but they've never partnered in the way that we have done with this program. Many individuals that go into operating a childcare within their home just see themselves as a babysitter. What in fact, when you are operating with children under the age of 5, you are an early educator. You are the first point of contact they have before kindergarten, and you are responsible for their growth and development. So in working with the CCR&R, we're kind of taking that, I'm just a babysitter watching kids, and you're an early educator, and here's the services that you need to implement assessment, screening, and curriculum. And we are, as the SBDC, stepping in and saying you're a business owner. As soon as you exchange funds, you are a business owner, and there's tax implications and policies and procedures that you need to abide by. And that has been, I would say, the greatest benefit of this program is the identity shift that has gone in with our providers. So what makes this program unique is that we partner the CCR&R and SBDC together to support that registered family child care provider. Many of our individual program participants are returning learners. So we partnered with community college early childhood education pathway, and have also seen a funnel of our providers now returning for continuing education, seeking degree pathways as well. The main entity that's important in coming in is the Oregon Department of Education. Many child care providers are intimidated by the state. So we bring in the licensor agent, both the first and last session, to turn that state police intimidation into a person that they have a relationship with. And they talk through what are the licensing steps and then what happens when there's a complaint. So we kind of remove that adversarial view of the state into more of a partnership view and help them to become licensed. So that's what Opportunity C is that I've outlined for you. We have a 7-week program where individuals get trained in best business practices and then receive a $5,000 grant at the end of that program. Our program consists of 7 3-hour sessions, all in the evening because many of our individuals are working families. They have 6 one-on-one business advising with me. I am now the instructor and advisor of this course. I was a teacher for 10 years and then ran my own in-home care for 3 years before this position. They also earn college credit, again, to help them on that pathway because we want them pursuing higher education to be a more qualified individual working with children. Upon completion of the course, they get the $5,000 grant and a year subscription to Wonderschool through the Oregon Child Care Alliance, which is another system that's kind of come in to support that business practices of childcare. And this is fantastic because Wonderschool is sort of childcare management software. It handles income, expenses, registration, signing in and out. So it really expedites that administrative part, which can take up almost 20 hours a week for a childcare provider on top of the 50 to 60 hours they're already pulling. So that's been a great benefit. And for those that aren't familiar with licensing terms, a registered family is for one individual operating out of their home, and they can watch up to 10 children. They can watch 2 infants. If they watch 2 infants, they can have up to 4 preschoolers. If they have no infants, they can have 6 preschoolers in their home and up to 4 school-age children. After 1 year of being a registered family, they can then apply for a certified family, which can have 12, 14, or 16 in their home, depending on square footage and additional employees. So that is our hope, that we'll take these registered family, train them up in how to be a successful business, and then we'll transfer into a certified family. Who we've helped. So since launching this in fall of 2021, we ran 8 programs, 6 in English and 2 in Spanish. So out of the classes, we've graduated over 50 and have awarded grants to over 30 providers. So you might be seeing a sort of drop in the numbers. That is something that our program has worked diligently to create an MOU and a prerequisite. So we're now properly filtering out the individuals before they come into our program. Many barriers have been landlord and HOA not wanting to have a childcare in their home. So the recent bill that's going through to prevent that, maybe, hopefully will help out with our program. There's also individuals that are still pending. They've faced difficulties with like the central background registry, taking up to 6 months to clear people, which can be a huge barrier, obviously, in trying to get licensed. But we are going to continue offering 3 to 4 English cohorts and 1 Spanish cohort through 2025. That is what we have with our current state funding thus far. Many also grants are still in progress, and our English or spring program is still going. So with the current grants that have been allocated, that has generated 400 new slots in Central Oregon with over 165,000 invested. That startup grant is really what's drawing individuals in because that kind of gives them that support before. It takes about 2 months to have full enrollment. So if you're looking at leaving your job, buying all the supplies, and then waiting 2 months until you have enough to be able to bring in income, that $5,000 really helps to support that process and transition. So where I'm putting the first part of my grant proposal request, something that I've discovered as the instructor and advisor is that a chicken and an egg thing going on where they have to become licensed in order to receive the funds, but some need funds in order to become licensed. So the first allocation of this new 100,000 for me is going to be towards the low income providers that need 250 to 350 upfront to cover all the equipment needed for that health and safety inspection. 250 sounds like very little, but it can make a really big impact to a single mom who's trying to make this transition. The second opportunity B, so similar to providing that best business practices for a childcare, for home, we've now launched it for centers. We plan to launch 2 cohorts. One started in March 2023. I currently have 7 providers in that. 4 are interested in opening in Bend, 1 in Redmond, and 2 in Prineville. This grant opportunity is for $6,000 per slot to up to $300,000, which seems like that's fantastic. But the current inflation in real estate, individuals are looking at $1 million for a startup. So while we're doing the best we can, we still need more. And we're hoping to look for those capital investments to come in because the real estate is really tight. But we do have one that just moved on a Midtown location, the Revere building, and is looking at some, that's what Sarah brought up to you. Thank you, Brianna. She was a guest speaker the other night in my course talking about the spaces. So because the original investment of this 100,000 was to kind of fill in what the permit fees, right? That was kind of the original, is to help out because on top of the building and on top of the SDCs, right, we also still have to pay for permit fees. So kind of keeping with that original intent of this grant, I do want to still set aside up to $7,000 for 4 new startups. $7,000 does cover the MDS change of use permit. So that would be enough to cover what they need with the city of Bend. And then finally, there's been recent efforts to promote childcare in the area. But if you are just a center that's trying to sustain slots, there actually have been no grants available because all of these have been on expansion. So those childcare providers that have been sustaining through the COVID hardship haven't been available for some of these recent grants. And in looking at the core development district, there's about 6 childcares that are just outside those lines that are not available for those facility developments. So it's really those individuals that are just outside the parameters that have not been captured by the expansion grant A opportunity that I'm hoping to support with some facility sustainability funds. So that looks at allocating $10,000 for 5 new certified 5 childcare centers with things like fixing plumbing. Kids love to throw wipes down the toilets, and we've had some providers that have gone through 3 to 4 emergency plumbing things over the past few years. So trying to help support them with, improving their overall systems, as well as some individuals like in the Norton building that the Active Learning Academy just moved into. That's a really aging and outdated building. And like some of the playground structures are not quite what I would consider safe for children at this stage. So I'd like some funds to be available for those individuals to make like playground upgrades to meet the new safety standards. Okay, so in overall looking at kind of fund allocation of this new 100,000, the 3 allocations that I mentioned were 2,000 to the low income start providers in our center cohort, 28,000 to support new center startups with covering permit fees, and then 50,000 to support some sustainability of slots. So those are individuals that are not expanding, but just need to help sustain the slots that they do have. We will obviously need to develop a application process to kind of screen who's eligible and how they're going to implement that. And I don't see the SBDC as being just a fiscal agent. I see us as providing service to the community. Childcare directors have to wear so many different hats, including now also being a project manager and lead constructed. So what I want to do is have a project management workshop for the providers that are brought into our startup funds. And they'll have 2 advising sessions with a financial advisor to do a cost benefit analysis of where that 10,000 is going to go. So the 5,000 is therefore then going to cover the instructor and advising fees of that project management workshop. And then program management, 15,000 to develop that application process. Okay, questions?
Wow. Right, covered a lot. I think that, the first portion was all for startups, correct?
The 100,000 was originally set aside purely for startups.
Okay.
From council, it was just to spur childcare expansion, new development. There were really no strings attached to it.
Okay.
Really where we ran into the challenge at the city level was I would get a call from someone. We set up kind of a framework for a program, 15,000 for less than 50 students, 25,000 for 50 or more. But I was getting calls from people just saying, I could use $80,000 for a down payment on a facility, right? And that sounds great, but it was really, I mean, I can't make that call, right? Without, has that person gone through some training? Have they been advised? How does their pro forma look, right? And that's really where Catherine and I started talking really about potential grant maybe 3 or 4 months ago. So there were no strings attached aside from get more childcare on the ground from council.
And learn something. And I
Sure.
think you guys have learned a ton, and I am not surprised you guys are getting national attention. So congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to City of Bend for starting this. If they hadn't come to Ken, this wouldn't have birthed. So I really appreciate where it's gone and where it's going to continue to go.
Awesome.
Yeah.
400 slots is significant, and the fact that they're well-rounded providers versus like, oh, just I picked some in-home care and hopefully it works out. Like,
Yeah, we're not looking for keep my kid alive care. We're looking
Right.
for quality care.
That's good. That's great.
Are these care centers generally within proximity of where the need is, or are people having to travel across town in order to get their children into slots that are available?
In what category are you referencing?
Just-
So like these new startups or?
No category in particular, just wondering if the location of where these childcare centers are emerging or exist or growing, if they're in locations that are within proximity of the people who need to use them, or if it's a transportation burden to get my kid across town and drop them off at childcare.
I think the transportation is what is currently what's happening. I know you've heard of individuals that have probably driving to Redmond and back just to be able to have a childcare slot. So the hope is with these new centers, we're going to actually eliminate a lot of that transportation that's going on. Well, something that we've discovered with the center program, it's not just one barrier. There's multiple barriers. There's the residential, what's available for lease that has green space, what's available for lease that can be zoned for childcare. There's so many different barriers and challenges that we're facing right now. So in terms of like, where is it going to go? It's really up to like, where can we find a spot that's going to fit, and that's been a challenge. So if you guys have recommendations or anybody that you know in the city of Bend that is interested in housing and childcare, we'd love to hear more about it. But the one space that has moved on is in Midtown Bend, which is excellent because it's right along that 97. So families that are in commuting can take advantage as well as local communities. The in-home childcare providers are all over. And that's, I think, where moving forward, just because of the gross profit margin on a childcare is between 5 and 10%. I mean, it's really not much. They don't have a whole lot of capital investment from doing this. It's really just a social work. It's like a break even for communities. So,
Which is why 50,000 for
Yeah.
like existing ones makes sense. Because you start to be like, why would you give an operating business more money? Wouldn't they be able to cover or retain funds? But that point is sort of, worth acknowledging.
exactly. But as we move forward, kind of as a community, I think continuing to invest in those in-home is going to make a difference because then you're providing childcare within communities and it's in their neighborhoods. So that's also a point with new economic development and building out, there should be an allocated space, a home that can be used as a certified family within that neighborhood. There should be one space allocated in each area. And I've met with Hayden Homes individuals to talk about that, of allocating a space and including that in your HOA bylaws, that it's okay to operate a business. So I think that investing in that in-home childcare within communities is ultimately we're going to solve this. Obviously, trying to get more center spaces available is what we hope for, but there's so many barriers that we're looking at to try and work through. And my goal ultimately will be to get my home-based program permanently funded. And as I roll this out across the state, and we see the success across the state, hopefully the state will get on board.
Is it the state that establishes the requirements that homeowners have to meet, or is that county or city?
It's the Oregon Department of Education, Early Learning
Education.
Division.
Have
They have to abide by like planning and like zoning laws, right? But it's the ODE that sets it.
Do you see a lot of the in-home, like the ones that you had go through your program, have aspirations to start small but then get bigger? I mean, is that like a common
It is.
pathway?
It is. Yep. So individuals that have started small and then now are branching out. And then the next thing that I'm hoping to incentivize that infant care, because individuals are often interested in running preschools, but they need a little more support around offering infant and toddler care. And when you offer that infant toddler care, your ratio drops so much that it's, and unless you're charging $2,300 a month for an infant, which is what it would take, then it's not going to be successful long term.
Yeah. I just really like that pathway you're setting up for like entrepreneurship and kind of reframing how these providers think of themselves in the kind of business ecosystem, because I think that's really empowering for them to think about like, oh, this is not just something I'm doing because I can or have like the time to do it. Like it's my own business, my own like even profession.
Yes.
That's pretty awesome.
And that's the point of our class, because now as your own employer, you need to think about health insurance.
Yeah.
Think about retirement planning and all those other pieces they don't consider. So yes, it's been that has been the main feedback of like, I feel like a business owner now.
Yeah.
And they're so excited when they go in the Oregon Secretary of State and register the LLC. I'm legit. Yeah. So that's been a major benefit.
That's great. I think Katie has a question online, and I had one question just about if there's any connections or one of the courses based on grants and fundraising. So there's also a component for new construction where you can tap into a lot of things. It definitely takes some unique skills and somebody that can take the time to sit down and write them and be competitive. But that might be another way to sort of new construction and development is so expensive, but that might be another way to look at it and tie in.
Absolutely. I agree that for our opportunity for the central providers, they're going to need that.
Yeah.
As they continue to offer affordable care to families, they're going to continue to need state subsidy to make that happen.
Yep.
So yeah, I love that idea of incorporating grant writing workshop.
Katie, I can't see you, but
Yep.
I heard
Hi. Can you see me now? Hi. So a couple of things. One of the other hats I wear, I sit on the Early Learning Council for the state. And as of July 1, we'll have a brand new department of the state called the Division of Early Learning and Care, who's responsible for the permits and basically the parameters of in-home and child care centers. And they've been watching programs like this. They've been certainly watching the COCC certification business planning program with providers, in-home providers specifically. And I just want to congratulate the city on considering this because it's just so essential to the economy. We hear about it literally every day, how folks can't get back to work because they can't find childcare. And these are the types that we can do together that make it more feasible, for sure. Another point, and then I'll get off, is I've been working with at least 2 developments in town, multifamily, who are overlapping lower than market rental with in-home childcare in the same space, and working on developing that rather than childcare centers because it's just the return on investment is lower. So as we look at the previous conversation we had today of sustainable cities, that as you build more densely, these types of models with home providers in multifamily units are a really intriguing way to look at getting 2 birds with 1 stone. Below market rental unit and a child care center for a in-home provider for that building of somebody else. So just want to put that bug in everybody's ear that those 2 things, economic development and development and child care, have intersecting interests as we look at building out Bend. And that was it.
Thank you, Katie.
And just to piggyback on that, another challenge faced by centers is the staffing crisis. So if you are operating in your home, you don't have to worry about that staffing crisis.
Any other questions or comments?
I think we need a
Awesome program.
Yes, so need a recommendation to city council, and I think supporting this, I don't think I would have any edits. I think you've had success and you'll continue to build on that, and I'm in support of making a motion to recommend approval of the grant.
I second that motion.
Yeah.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Excellent. I'm going to leave my white paper and business card with Ben.
Perfect. And
Thank
I'll
you,
be in
Catherine.
touch about the
Thank you.
grant agreement this week, Catherine.
Thank you.
Just pass this down.
Yes. And then next is for us.
Do we have enough time for all four?
For all
Wondering
four.
if from a prioritization standpoint, are we gonna be able to get through all four?
I think, well,
It's hard stop at 2.
we should get there. This is going to be pretty quick. The next thing is just logistics. It's a quick vote.
So good afternoon, Russ Grayson, Chief Operating Officer. Just going to give you a quick overview of the budget deliberations and kind of where we're going with fees. Going to go run up and grab our, I think it's a
Right, that's a
600-page budget
big-
document. And
This is going to be quick.
we won't go through. So page one, right? If everyone knows page one. And obviously your council liaison, Council Perkins is here as well if you have any questions. So budget deliberations were last week, 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago. Yeah, they were well. The budget committee is made up of city council and an equal number of just community representatives on that committee. It was a very robust discussion. It's over $1 billion budget over the biennium, so it's a significant amount of money. But just to drill down into what really is kind of the heart of this committee is really around permitting fees. And I can kind of elaborate a little bit more on the growth management budgets as well. So as is usual, it really comes down to where the most discretionary fund, the general fund, where those resources go. Everything was put on the table. It was I would think it was probably one of the best budget deliberations I've been involved with. The good thing is there's never comments about, I think you're missing a comment at 0 somewhere. So the numbers were really representative of what the city's being asked to do. And when we got to deliberations, it was really around 3 main areas. One was around housing and houselessness and the ongoing struggles and programmatic issues and funding limitations there. There was discussion around the permitting fees on various levels, but really started to hone in on planning services around if you know Pauline Hardy, who does all of our code amendments, about that being more kind of a shared resource amongst the city and should be general fund allocated. There was desire, I can tell you, on the permitting fees to help subsidize that more. There's just not that ability within the city's budget. And I could give you a whole very long, very detailed explanation of the why behind that. But we just have really, we have the second lowest tax rate in the state, and then we're a fast growing city. So the needs are everywhere. And the third was around additional staffing in police. So what council did basically is when in deliberations, they were talking about reserve levels the city had. We're currently around like 20% reserves in the general fund. Our financial policy is 16% is our minimum. Council decided to lower it to 18%, which generated around another $1 million or so a year in discretionary funding. What they chose to do was to put 2 additional police officers on the street with those funds over the next 2 years, allocate $200,000 a year to planning to basically pay for that code work that needs to be done on an ongoing basis. They wish they could do more. I think that was a discussion. And then the rest went into housing. Some of the discussions that came out of the budget committee, especially around the permitting and the community development staff, was keeping the resources that we have there. There was a robust discussion around reserves. They felt that keeping the current level of staff that we have, now that we've finally ramped up, we're starting to see the results of that in terms of review times. It's important to keep that strength. So they were supportive of the kind of negotiated budget or fee increases that were proposed, which was 12% in the building fees, 20% in the planning fees, and 10% in the engineering fees. The construction excise tax did not increase, and the growth management fee did not increase. But we're going to continue to monitor that and discuss that in a small working group that we have, a stakeholder group that one of your members has graciously volunteered, Gary, to be on. That kicks up in July and will probably go through the rest of this year, because that'll probably not only talk about permit fees, but also probably the transportation fee that's in discussion, as well as the system development charges methodology, which is currently underway. So with all that, I can just tell you that council was very interested in supporting, putting more money into the permit center and fees. They understood the needs, but just trying to balance all the other competing programs and community desires and policies. That's where they can land. So that's the budget that is being recommended for approval, not at this meeting, but at the next meeting. There will be a work session tomorrow talking about the fees and the fee increases, and we'll continue to monitor that as we move forward. It's a very quick, high-level overview, but I can answer any questions.
Is it on the city website, some of the stuff that was discussed, or no?
No, it's mainly in just kind of in the deliberations at the budget committee. But they definitely heard they were concerned, obviously, around the fee increases. They understood the why, and wished they could do more, but it just wasn't possible in the current budget.
Any questions or comments?
All right, and then we'll continue to update as we work through with Gary and the stakeholder group on fees. I'm sure we'll be back talking much more in the months to come. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Russ.
So the next item is appoint temporary economic development strategy working group.
So we just need to appoint the group and actually have a vote. So Tierney wants to participate. I'd love to get a raise of hands for this kind of monthly working group and just actually have a vote, because it's going to bridge two different BDAB terms as Keith and Travis term off. So can we go around here? Keith, I wanted to know if you wanted to continue on that board. It's really loud. I'm yelling into it.
I am interested, but I don't know if time constraints. I got a lot of stuff going on.
Sure.
And I'm not
I
sure
don't mean to
if I
put you
can.
on the spot, by the way. Travis has expressed a willingness to help bridge that transition between two different boards, I guess you'd say.
I'm interested.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kelly, you're on it. You're willing to stay on. Don is on it.
How many people do you need?
I think that's it. But we haven't had a vote, right? And that was kind of the
Everybody's
concern.
on the board.
Yeah. We'll have a few new members. Yeah. Great. So Jeremy, Travis, Tierney, and Kelly, and Don will be the group that will kind of meet. But it would be great to get a motion on that and a vote, just so BDAB can create their own subcommittees. But without that, if Travis, for example, after terming off, which ties into the next agenda item, if Travis wanted to represent BDAB at a council meeting, that would be hard if you hadn't created a subcommittee.
Gotcha.
So this is logistics more than it is, an in-depth discussion today.
Okay, so I don't remember all the names you just said, but a motion to approve all of those that were interested.
That's fine. I think Gina probably got it. So.
Okay. All in favor?
Yeah.
Aye.
Aye.
Perfect. And then the next thing, I just wanted to leave some room to acknowledge that Keith and Kevin, who isn't here, and Travis are terming off. There'll be no meeting in July after 6 years on the board, which is,
Holy moly.
I think you get a letter from the mayor at some point, so that's something to look forward to. And then I do try to grab a beer, not using city funds, with all the members to kind of pick your brains. A root beer, yeah, we could do that after you've termed off. But wanted to leave some space for if anyone had any thoughts or feedback. I did just take a look through the letters that BDAP has written to council, and you've weighed in on expanding the enterprise zone, renewing the enterprise zone, creating a Visit Bend rainy day fund, about 4 different letters on Juniper Ridge. And I think really you look back to 2018 and now, it doesn't always feel like it, but Juniper Ridge has really got moving in large part because of the work BDAP has done. Urban growth boundary implementation, parks SDCs, which was a fun conversation if any of you remember that. The climate action plan, moving the core area forward, and a whole lot about permits as well. So pretty broad array of items, along with 6 Visit Bend business plans, 3 EDCO contracts, 3 business advocacy budgets as well. So thank you. I mean, I've appreciated your guys' feedback and participation, and the fact that you typically don't pull many punches at these meetings either. So.
Well done.
Yeah, thank you so
Thank
much.
you. No, it's been great. It's definitely interesting. You learn so much stuff, and you find out just how much the general public does not know about the goings-ons of the city and county and how they get them mixed. Well, the city's, no, that's the county. The county is, no, that's the city.
That's true.
It's like all the different projects and yeah, it's funny, you know. You can be at a barbecue and people start talking about this. It's like, well, no, that's not exactly what's, is happening. Knowing everything from what's going on, the construction on the northern end of Bend and the highways and everything like that, to, all sorts of other things. Just it's good to be in the know.
That's a Pandora's box at a barbecue, though.
Right. Yeah.
I just think go to the city council meeting. They do talk about these things. You can attend and listen in.
It does give you a different perspective. So I certainly appreciate all the elected officials and what you go through. Thank you for your service and all the other committees and boards. Like, we're just one of many, many committees. So it's been fun. Thank you guys for serving ongoing.
Yeah. And good luck too.
Yeah. Thanks, Travis, for all the guidance for where I am right now, or encouragement. I don't know. Setting the good example. Okay. Then there was roundtable, which we have 10 minutes. Yeah.
I think both of you.
Okay,
You each get 5 minutes.
I just wanted to let you know about something interesting. I had a meeting with, I don't know her exact title, but I believe she's the DEI director for the Bend LaPine schools. And Talina Barker was there from the chamber. So the chamber is going to be doing their own information piece on this, but it's about the state seal of biliteracy. And there is a program for high school graduates right now that if they show proficiency in 2 languages, and that's listening, understanding, speak it, and write it. And it could be through AP classes, it could be through other means as well as graduation requirements, the regular graduation requirements. They get a special seal from the Department of Education. And this year they're going to graduate 60 in this program. And it's obviously the majority is Spanish, but they have ASL, Hebrew, Chinese, Vietnamese. And so it is growing every year. And the idea behind it is that 2 things are supposed to happen, and the benefit of this for kids. And one is obviously university credits. They're still sort of working that out with the university system. That's a tough nut to crack. But the other is that there is a benefit for these kids that are entering the workforce. That you have a skill that we need in our workforce, and particularly she reached out to us to see how we locally could invest in these kids and show them that this is we support your skills, and this is a value and a skill set that we need in our local workforce. So just wanted to bring some attention to it because it's awesome and something that is so well needed in our economy and our world right now, and in almost every job. It is a benefit, and just to have you all think on your own time, about ways that we can support this program, and maybe it can go out in your newsletter and just to highlight it. And she's willing to write an article highlighting some of the kids that are in the program as well, to put a actual face to this part. I just wanted to bring it to your attention.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
One is a question, one is a question, and one is a comment. On the CFA conversation, this is just a placeholder, I think, for additional. We'll talk about it Wednesday.
Sure.
But I couldn't leave this meeting without it being addressed. The conversation is around construction development of primarily housing and mixed use. I'm not sure what mixed use means in the context of the CFA. When I think of mixed use, I think of minor impact on employment land. And so I just don't know how we're going to create the jobs required for the people required for this high-rise density building. And so I just don't see it in the equation. I didn't hear it in today's conversation, and I'm really concerned about it. So just a placeholder conversation. I'm not sure we have time to talk about it today. We'll talk about it Wednesday, but it just seems a gaping hole to me in how it works. And then also there was consideration that the CFA would be litigated, and it would be uncertain, and that we didn't talk about that today. So I'd like to learn more about the possibilities of how that ends up. So that's all. I don't want, I don't think we have time, but I'm distressed about it. The other thing is BDAB on the, I mean, how are we doing on filling the cavernous hole left by these three departing participants?
So there
No,
will
I know,
be-
how are we doing on?
There will be
candidates?
2 appointments made by the mayor on June 21st, I think.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so we had 3 openings. We will likely be going out again for the final opening. So keep an eye out for that. I'll share that announcement once it goes out.
Good.
But
Thank-
I think the 2 candidates, certainly one with a lot of development expertise.
Awesome.
Yeah, what gap are we still trying to fill in terms of expertise with that third?
You know, it's broad, right? You really just don't want duplication in terms of certain areas of expertise. I mean, with Kevin Cole terming off, we won't have a financial industry representative for probably the first time, certainly since I've been here.
Okay.
That may be an area to look at.
Yeah, some of those budget things, a finance person would be great.
Yeah, and Keith too. Yeah, Keith was always willing to.
You're losing,
Line item.
you're losing all your professional services, right? Banking, insurance, and
Yeah.
That's
and
true.
accounting.
Well, you got architectural
Some
services
real
still.
employers in the room.
Yeah.
There's still some service
We do have that, but
providers.
No,
no banking or
financial ser-
finance expertise.
financial services.
Financial services. We should focus
Read my
on.
own
do not
P&L
have
statement. That's
hospitality.
about as
That's
far as it
another
goes.
It is.
We're going to miss that candid, honest response and thought by the 3 of you. So thanks for being a part. It's great.
Thank you, Don.
Yeah, and just on the CFA comment too, Don. I mean, mixed use doesn't preclude employment. The Timber Yards master plan that'll be before council on Wednesday, I think, includes 150,000 square feet of office space. So that's not saying anything that councilors won't have already heard, because I know that's a quasi judicial thing, but that's quite a lot of office space. And I think it's in a later phase. But yeah, certainly this doesn't apply to industrial land.
Well, I mean,
At
just,
all,
but
but
that office space doesn't satisfy the balanced employment need that a balanced economy needs.
Sure, although we've
So-
had no office space built in like 4 years here in Bend, so.
But we're not short on office space. I mean, we need office space. We will need it, but it's not in terms of what would you do tomorrow if you had one choice. It wouldn't probably be build an office, be crank up on Juniper Ridge like we're headed. So
Sure.
anyway,
That's why we're going to
it-
create an economic development strategy. So we'll be
Yeah.
able to answer that question, right? More definitively.
Yeah.
And it seemed like from just the there's rules being developed for the implementation, but we're in a good position from a housing standpoint, not necessarily all the other components of it. So then we're going to fill the need that we have, and then the other would probably come later. In reality, you wouldn't say, oh, you have to do it equally because it's based on development. There's no way to enforce it or make development happen unless it's incentivized.
Yeah, but I predict that, Ben's and the city's good work on Juniper Ridge will create that land consumable very quickly, relatively quickly for largely, in my guess, my crystal ball would be the existing companies will consume that land. Now we'll create additional space that'll be vacated, and that's wonderful, but I think it'll get consumed. Now we need housing. Obviously, we need housing so our folks can afford to grab the jobs that are available and live comfortably. But anyway, I just thought that was the point that was vacant. And maybe it's all discussed and thought about in the CFA and we just didn't get to it today. And I
don't think it sounds like that.
I was hoping, I'm like.
Maybe the last.
TBDs.
Yeah, it's a lot of faith. Yeah.
Thanks, you guys.
Thanks.
All right, I think we're adjourned.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, well done.